You work harder every year, yet money feels smaller and harder to hold on to. Not because you failed, but because the system is doing exactly what it was designed to do. Money doesn't disappear. It gets quietly filtered, slowed, and redirected long before it ever feels like wealth. Money rarely arrives in your life in the clean, complete form people imagine. By the time it reaches you, it has already been reduced, redirected, and reshaped by systems operating quietly in the background. The moment income is earned, a portion is removed before it ever touches your hands. Taxes are deducted automatically, broken into categories with official names that sound administrative but carry real weight. What feels like a single paycheck is actually a series of obligations being settled in advance. This process conditions people to accept that not all earned money truly belongs to them. It creates a psychological baseline where loss is normalized and expected, making the remaining amount feel like a reward rather than the default. Once money lands in your account, the erosion does not stop. Inflation begins working immediately, slowly reducing what that money can do. Prices rise without announcement, and the same bill that once covered a full bag of groceries now covers less. Nothing about the number changes, but the experience does. This is what makes inflation so powerful. It doesn't feel like theft. It feels like life getting more expensive. Because the change is gradual. People adapt instead of resisting. They blame their spending habits, their choices, or their income level, rarely recognizing that the currency itself is quietly losing strength over time. At the same time, money is constantly being moved through systems you never directly see. Banks, governments, and institutions treat money less like personal property and more like a circulating resource. Deposited money does not rest. It flows, gets lent, leveraged, and multiplied elsewhere. Even taxes don't simply disappear. They are redistributed into infrastructure, services, salaries, and projects far removed from the individual who earned the original income. This separation between effort and outcome makes money feel abstract. You work for it personally, but it is managed impersonally. That disconnect shapes how people value their own labor and how easily they accept money leaving their control. Over time, this constant reduction and redirection changes behavior. People start focusing on the size of their paycheck rather than what it can actually buy. Raises feel smaller than expected. Savings don't seem to grow as fast as planned. There is a growing sense that money slips away no matter how careful someone is. This is not always due to poor decisions. It is often the result of systems designed to operate automatically, efficiently, and without emotional friction. When money moves invisibly, resistance fades. What can be seen is rarely questioned. The modern financial world also fragments responsibility. Taxes are blamed on governments, inflation on markets, fees on institutions, and prices on businesses. No single force feels accountable, even though the combined effect is substantial. This fragmentation makes it difficult to understand where money truly goes or why it feels insufficient. People experience financial pressure without a clear source, leading to frustration and confusion rather than clarity. Money becomes something that must be chased, protected, and constantly replaced, rather than something stable and dependable. As this pattern repeats year after year, people adapt their expectations. They plan around loss instead of abundance. They assume that a portion of everything they earn will vanish, so they emotionally detach from it early. This detachment reduces outrage but increases resignation. Money stops feeling like stored effort and starts feeling like a temporary tool that must be used quickly before it loses more value. This mindset encourages spending, urgency, and short-term thinking, reinforcing the very systems that keep money in motion. In the end, money is not just earned and spent. It is filtered, diluted, and circulated through layers that shape how people experience work, reward, and security. The true story of money is not how much you make, but how much survives the journey through taxes, inflation, and invisible systems before it ever becomes useful to you. Banks and interest quietly decide how money moves through time, shaping who benefits and who struggles long after the initial transaction is forgotten. Most people see banks as neutral storage spaces, safe places where money waits patiently to be used. In reality, Banks exist to keep money in motion. The moment money is deposited, it becomes part of a larger system designed to lend, multiply, and extract value from the difference between what is given and what is taken back. This process is so normalized that it feels invisible, yet it influences nearly every financial outcome people experience. Interest is the central force that gives this system power. It represents the price of time. When money is borrowed, interest measures how much extra must be returned for the privilege of using it early. When money is saved or invested, interest becomes the reward for waiting. This dual nature makes interest morally neutral, but financially decisive. It does not care who you are or why you need the money. It simply accumulates, steadily and predictably, favoring those positioned to earn it and burdening those required to pay it. The flow of money through banks relies on trust and expectation. Depositors trust that their money will be available when needed, while borrowers trust that future income will cover present obligations. Banks sit between these two beliefs, converting confidence into profit by lending deposited money at higher rates than they return to savers. Banks capture the spread as income. This spread may seem small in isolation, but multiplied across millions of accounts and loans, it becomes enormous. Over time, this mechanism concentrates financial advantage within institutions that control access to credit. Debt transforms the emotional relationship people have with money. Borrowed money feels empowering at first, expanding what seems possible in the present. The cost of that expansion is delayed, broken into smaller payments that feel manageable. Interest thrives in this delay. Each passing period adds weight to the original amount, slowly turning convenience into obligation. Because the growth is incremental, it rarely triggers alarm. What began as a simple transaction becomes a long-term drain on future earnings, often unnoticed until the total cost is far greater than expected. On the other side of the system, interest rewards stillness. Money that remains untouched, allowed to compound, begins to grow in a way that feels disproportionate to effort. This growth accelerates with time, creating a widening gap between money that earns interest and money that pays it. The system does not require brilliance or luck to produce this outcome. It only requires time and positioning. As years pass, the difference between these two paths becomes dramatic, shaping entire lives and generations. Banks amplify this divide by controlling who receives favorable terms. Access to lower interest rates signals trust, stability, and perceived reliability. Higher rates signal risk, regardless of intent or circumstance. This pricing of trust means that those already seen as stable gain cheaper access to money, while those viewed as uncertain pay more for the same resource. Interest, in this way, becomes a quiet judgment embedded into every loan, reinforcing existing financial hierarchies without explicit decisions. Over time, the constant interaction between banks, interest, and human behavior creates predictable patterns. Money flows toward those who already have it, while obligations accumulate for those who rely on borrowing. This is not driven by malice, but by structure. Banks are designed to reward predictability and patience, and interest is the mechanism that enforces this design. The result is a system where money does not simply represent value, but time, trust, and control, quietly determining who benefits from the future and who pays for it. Economic cycles influence behavior long before people understand what is happening. Inflation, recessions, and policy decisions do not arrive as announcements in everyday life. They appear as higher prices, fewer job listings, and a subtle shift in mood. These forces operate in the background, shaping decisions through pressure rather than explanation. By the time people recognize the pattern, behavior has already changed. Spending slows, caution rises, and confidence begins to fade, even if individual circumstances have not yet collapsed. Inflation is often the first signal that something in the system is overheating. Prices rise not because money disappears, but because too much money is competing for limited goods and services. This competition pushes costs upward, reducing the purchasing power of each unit of currency. Inflation rarely feels dramatic at first. It arrives quietly, one price increase at a time, training people to accept less for the same amount. Over time, this erodes savings and reshapes priorities. Money meant for the future gets pulled into the present as people rush to buy before prices rise further. This behavior reinforces the cycle, turning expectation into reality. Governments and central banks respond to inflation by adjusting interest rates, using borrowing costs as a brake on spending. When rates rise, loans become more expensive and access to money tightens. This slows economic activity, not because people suddenly want less, but because they can afford less. The effect is psychological as much as financial. Higher rates signal caution, encouraging people and businesses to delay decisions. The economy cools as hesitation replaces momentum. This deliberate slowdown often sets the stage for the next phase of the cycle. Recessions emerge when this cooling turns into contraction. Businesses cut costs, investment stalls, and job losses spread uncertainty. What makes recessions particularly powerful is the speed at which fear travels. Even those not directly affected begin to behave defensively. Spending drops, savings are guarded, and risk is avoided. The economy, driven by collective behavior, responds accordingly. Reduced demand leads to further cuts, reinforcing the downturn. Recessions feel sudden because confidence collapses faster than systems can adapt. Despite their severity, recessions function as resets within the broader cycle. Excesses built up during periods of expansion are unwound. Inefficient businesses disappear. Valuations fall, and expectations recalibrate. Governments often intervene to soften the impact, lowering interest rates or injecting money to restore confidence. These actions aim to restart spending and investment, gradually reversing the downward trend. Recovery begins quietly, long before optimism returns, as small signs of stability encourage cautious participation. Throughout this cycle, policy acts less like direct control and more like influence. Governments do not command people to spend or save. They shape conditions that make certain behaviors more attractive or more difficult. Interest rates, taxes, and spending programs act as signals rather than orders. People respond instinctively, adjusting their actions based on perceived risk and opportunity. This indirect approach allows economic systems to remain flexible, but it also makes outcomes feel unpredictable and personal. Over time, repeated cycles teach societies how to react. Inflation encourages urgency. Recessions encourage restraint, and recovery restores confidence. These patterns become ingrained, shaping expectations across generations. People learn to fear downturns and chase growth, often without understanding the forces at work. Economic cycles continue not because they are inevitable, but because human behavior responds to incentives in consistent ways. The system reflects collective psychology, turning individual reactions into large-scale outcomes that define entire eras. Modern money systems are built less on physical reality and more on trust, perception, and shared belief. At the center of this structure is the idea that money works because people agree that it does. A paper bill, a digital number on a screen, or a line of code in a database holds power only because society collectively treats it as valuable. This agreement is rarely questioned in daily life, yet it shapes every financial interaction. Once belief is established, systems can grow complex without losing legitimacy, even if the underlying value remains intangible. Credit scores are one of the clearest examples of how perception governs access to money. These scores do not measure how much someone owns, but how reliably they have behaved within the financial system. They convert past actions into a single number that represents trustworthiness. Lenders rely on this abstraction to make decisions quickly, reducing human judgment to algorithmic assessment. This process feels objective, but it is rooted in perception. A person can have stable income and minimal expenses yet be viewed as risky due to limited history. Another can carry significant obligations and still be seen as trustworthy because their past behavior aligns with expectations. Trust extends beyond individuals to institutions. Banks, governments, and currencies depend on public confidence to function. When people believe their deposits are safe, banks can operate with minimal physical reserves. When people believe a currency will hold value, they continue to accept it in exchange for goods and labor. This belief sustains stability. When it weakens, systems strain. History shows that once confidence breaks, recovery is difficult, not because resources vanish, but because trust does. The fear of loss spreads faster than loss itself. Value, like money, is shaped by collective agreement. Objects and services are not inherently valuable. They become valuable when people desire them and believe others will as well. This is why branding, reputation, and narrative play such powerful roles in economics. A product associated with status or innovation commands more than a functionally identical alternative. The difference lies in perception, not utility. This mechanism extends to assets, investments, and even careers. Certain skills or roles are rewarded disproportionately because they are perceived as scarce or prestigious, regardless of their actual contribution. Currency itself reflects this principle. Government-issued money carries authority because it is backed by legal systems, enforcement, and historical continuity. Digital assets challenge this by offering alternative forms of trust based on technology and decentralization. Yet both rely on belief. Without acceptance, neither functions. Regulation, adoption, and narrative shape which forms of money feel legitimate at any given time. The transition between them is driven less by technical superiority and more by shifts in confidence and familiarity. These layers of perception influence behavior subtly but persistently. People modify actions to appear reliable, fearing exclusion from financial systems more than debt itself. Timely payments, account activity, and visible stability become signals of trustworthiness. This encourages conformity to system rules, reinforcing their authority. Even skepticism operates within boundaries defined by shared belief. Questioning value does not remove its influence. It often strengthens awareness of how deeply perception controls outcomes. In the end, money systems function as mirrors of collective psychology. Trust allows abstraction to replace physical exchange. Perception assigns value where none inherently exists. Belief keeps systems running smoothly without constant enforcement. Understanding this reveals that finance is not merely about numbers, but about stories people agree to live by, shaping access, opportunity, and power through shared acceptance rather than tangible certainty. Time and value creation operate as the deepest forces behind long-term wealth, working quietly while short-term actions receive most of the attention. Money itself does not grow on its own. It responds to how long it is allowed to exist within systems designed to multiply it and to the amount of value attached to the person or process controlling it. These two elements shape outcomes more reliably than income level. Luck, or momentary success. Time transforms small, ordinary decisions into powerful results through repetition. A single year rarely feels significant, but decades compound behavior into identity. Money that remains invested over long periods begins to grow in a non-linear way, where gains generate further gains. This acceleration feels slow at first, often discouraging, but it steadily builds momentum. What makes time so effective is its indifference. It rewards consistency without judgment and magnifies both progress and neglect equally. The same passage of years that grows wealth can also deepen financial strain when obligations accumulate. Value creation determines how much money flows toward an individual or idea. Value is not fixed or objective. It is assigned by others based on usefulness, scarcity, and perception. A skill that solves a common problem efficiently becomes valuable because many people are willing to exchange money for it. When that skill scales or influences large systems, its perceived worth increases dramatically. This explains why certain professions, products, and ideas attract disproportionate financial rewards. The money follows impact as defined by collective demand, not personal effort alone. As value increases, time amplifies its effects. A person who creates something useful once benefits briefly. A person who creates something useful repeatedly benefits continuously. When value compounds, each unit of time works harder than the last. This compounding is not limited to investments. Reputation, expertise, and trust also grow over time, reducing friction and increasing opportunity. Past contributions continue to generate returns long after the initial effort has ended, creating a widening gap between those who build enduring value and those who trade time directly for income. Time also shapes perception. Early stages of growth often appear insignificant. leading many to abandon long-term paths before results become visible. Society tends to celebrate sudden success while ignoring the years that preceded it. This distorts expectations, making slow progress feel like failure. In reality, most substantial wealth emerges from long periods of quiet accumulation. The appearance of effortlessness at the end hides the persistence required at the beginning. The relationship between time and money also explains why patience is rare but powerful. Immediate rewards feel tangible, while future gains remain abstract. Choosing outcomes that favor the future requires trusting systems that do not provide instant feedback. This trust allows time to do its work. Those who maintain consistency benefit from forces that remain invisible in the short term but overwhelming in the long term. Ultimately, wealth is not built through isolated moments, but through sustained alignment between time and value. Money grows when value is created and allowed to mature within systems that reward longevity. The passage of years turns modest actions into significant outcomes, not through intensity, but through endurance. Time does not rush, but it never stops, steadily shaping financial destinies through accumulation rather than spectacle.